Welcome to the STEM Pathways podcast, where we delve into the fascinating world of science, technology, engineering, and math. I'm your host, Rohan Sharma, a passionate explorer of all things STEM. Each episode, we bring you captivating stories, cutting edge research, and inspiring interviews with experts and enthusiasts who are pushing the boundaries of innovation. Whether you're a student, a professional, or just curious about how the world works, join us as we unlock the mysteries of the universe and explore the endless possibilities of STEM. Let's get started. Today I'll be interviewing Chris Magnuson, who holds a degree in electrical engineering from Colorado State University. How are you doing today?
I'm good. Thanks for having me on your show.
And thanks for coming on. So to get started, I wanted to ask what made you choose your major back when you were in college?
That's a good question. Going back to high school, I played electric guitar, and one of the things that I picked up was this skill in electronics so that I could make little gizmos for my electric guitar to plug into and make weird sounds. So I kind of learned in high school, I learned electronics. So I kind of thought, well, I still want to be a veterinarian, but let me just put down electrical engineering as a backup major. And I got into school, and within a semester, I decided I wasn't going to do veterinarian stuff anymore for various reasons. Like I fainted at a vet hospital when they were doing an operation on a dog. So I thought, this was time for me to reevaluate what I was doing. So I changed over to electrical engineering, and that's what I've been doing.
Yeah. So what was your first job out of college?
Hewlett Packard.
Okay.
Um, I designed electronic circuits at Hewlett Packard and their microwave division in Santa Rosa, California. And that was a great job. Um, but what started happening the minute I got that role was that the world of software was kind of starting to explode. And when I was designing electronic circuits, I'd submit the design to the draftsman. They would create a circuit board. The materials engineer would review the parts that I was thinking about using. It was a long process. It took a month to get stuff turned around before you could build things and try them out in kind of a production capacity. So the thing about software is you hit compile and you can try it right away. So I started getting attracted to software, and that's basically within a year of moving to HP, going to work at HP. I moved into software and been doing that ever since.
Yeah. So what'd you do at your next job?
My next job was still at Hewlett Packard, only in a different state. Um, and that was writing software for production tests for oscilloscopes. The Hewlett Packard Corporation at the time was in a very competitive situation with Tektronix. So we were always working on coming up with the most innovative stuff we could and getting it out there. Today, I believe uh, that line of oscilloscopes is now part of another company called Keysight that was spun out of HP. But if I'm not mistaken, they are the market leader finally now.
Yeah. And in your early jobs, what was something that really helped you learn and adapt, especially when you transition from hardware to software?
I think the biggest thing anyone can have that's going to be helpful to them in their career is uh, some form of extreme curiosity. And by that, what I think of is wanting to understand how things work, wanting to know that the stuff that you're working on works right down to first principles, like you can explain everything about how your stuff works. And that's, I think, the biggest thing as an engineer that you can develop is this curiosity and kind of a persistence for making sure you understood and understand everything about what you're working on.
Yeah. So what was your next job?
My next job, I think it was software at HP again, but this time I think it was right for the scanner division that made scanners for computers, personal computers. So I moved from test equipment over into the computing side of Hewlett Packard. At the time, that was the computing side, and they were really like night and day different. Um, I guess I thought when I moved to the computer side of HP that they would really have their processes together and wow, this is how I'm going to really learn how to write software. But actually, we did more rigorous stuff in the test instrument world. So it was a little letdown in that sense, but it was a great job for a couple of years. I ended up working on writing scanner drivers for Photoshop for the Mac, uh, so that you could scan from your computer or, scan directly pictures or documents or whatever directly into your computer using Photoshop. So that was the big thing I did while I was there.
Yeah. So what job do you have after that?
Um, let's see. Oh, okay. I now remember. So it was the first optical disk drive that was read writable, like a DVD type laser. And this was a joint development project between Hewlett Packard and Sony. The product never got shipped, and I left before the project ended. But that was interesting. It was writing embedded software for disk drives. But after that, I decided to start my own company. So I moved out of HP and I started a internet service provider that went for 10 or 11 years and did everything from, internet access to web hosting. Those were the early days of the ISP world. Today it's uh very rolled up, very integrated into big players. Back then though, you could have a small player like our company get in there and make a big difference in the marketplace, have a lot of customers. So yeah, we did that for 10 or 11 years. Have ended up with a couple of data centers. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah. Um, how hard was it being like the leader of this company?
It was tough. Yeah, no, I was spending a lot of time on it, a lot of hours. Um, because I didn't fund it. I didn't go out and get funding to do it. I did it with all my own money. I started with $15,000 and grew it into $1 million company in 5 years. And so, it was a lot of stress. I put a lot of pressure on myself. Looking back, probably would have gotten a more of a funding kind of partner type thing. That would have made it easier. But I did have a partner that I started with, but the funding was all put up by me. So that's something that, if you could go into a company and get funding to do it and have a business plan that allowed you to secure funding through somebody, some sort of investor or venture capital house, that might be one way to do it. Back then, I don't think you could have got funded to start an ISP through a venture capitalist. It's not a new enough or interesting enough opportunity for them. I didn't hear about a lot of venture capital work in the ISP space. It was mostly telecom companies and stuff like that. So um, I think I worked a few too many hours, per week. So after 10 years of that, I was ready to go do something else.
Yeah. Um, so how much, while you're doing that, did you also learn a ton about just having a business?
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, and that's one thing I would tell somebody. I think that was thinking about starting a business. It's interesting because I see a lot of people doing all kinds of analysis and all kinds of things like that before they start a business, and I think that's probably appropriate for a larger business. But if you're just getting started on something, just start doing it and see what happens. You can do it in your spare time after work. Um, you know, Try and find a business that you can start and bootstrap and that, is profitable as quickly as possible and has something viable that people want. Um, Instead of, the other way to do it is a lot of funding, a lot of presentations, a lot of, there's a whole book of knowledge you'd need to develop in order to learn how to talk to venture capitalists and do a startup that way. But if you just bootstrap it with your own money and your own time, you might be surprised what you can get done.
Yeah. So what was your job after that?
So after that, I went back into the corporate world. I worked for a company called EMC. They were eventually bought by Dell. And then I'm not sure what happened to them after that. Maybe it's still part of Dell. But I did that for about 4 years back into software engineering. And so I was a principal software engineer there. Some of the code I wrote is part of the the VMware vSphere product, which some people out there might be familiar with. It's kind of the flagship virtualization product when it came out, and pretty much one of the big competitors to Hyper-V from Microsoft. And now that software VMware is owned by Broadcom. So yeah, that was an interesting time. The thing about that project that was interesting was they weren't interested in hiring new or less experienced engineers. They had a 1 year window to develop and ship this product, so couldn't miss. So they hired only really experienced people to do it. And that was interesting because that's the first time I was in a project where there weren't some more junior people to bring up. So that's the one thing about that project that still sticks with me to this day is just how, it really couldn't fail. They had to have the experienced people on there and weren't going to have any excuses for not delivering on time. A lot of times software projects will slip. You'll start it, you'll come up with a distributor or a release date or something like that. Uh, but a lot of times you won't hit that date. And back in the time frame that was done, which was probably about 2010 or so, a lot of software projects were just becoming adopting this agile type methodology. But that project was still using the old school waterfall model where you gather requirements and you figure out resources and do design documents and all that kind of stuff. It's fairly serialized process, whereas the agile process is much more iterative and interactive. So that's what was interesting about that.
Yeah. So what was your next job?
Hmm. I think the next few jobs after that were director. Yeah, they were director jobs at smaller companies. So I was in charge of departments of between, oh, 10 and 20 people, 10 and 25 people. I really can't remember. But they were things like, one of them was a network engineering manager kind of director level job. So companies, running a company's entire network, smaller company. One of them was working at uh, part of a hedge fund, the technology wing of a hedge fund. And so I just kind of went into more management type roles, which really piggybacked on all the business experience I developed from running that company. But one of the things I've done a lot is switch back and forth between management and engineering. Not a super common thing. A lot of times people will get a job as an engineer, go into management, go into more management, go into a higher level management, go into a higher level management, that kind of thing. My career is not really monotonic that way, and that's by design. The only way I can keep up to speed with the latest technologies is to periodically go back into an engineering role and work as an engineer and not stay solely in management. So right now I'm working as a consultant on some cloud engineering projects, no management at all right now. And it's all, Google Cloud type stuff. Uh, so all those jobs were director level management type things, but eventually I ended up back in engineering again at a financial services firm before I went to Google for 4 years.
Yeah. So do you prefer management or actual engineering?
I like kind of a mix, like technical roles that are sort of a project leader type of thing. So that's the best because that's the easiest way to get things done. I don't really enjoy working in middle management at corporations. It's too far away from the actual work. And in my opinion, a lot of companies tend to focus on the higher you get and the farther away in management you get from the engineers doing the work, the more disconnected you become from what really matters and what really needs to get done. And it's hard to maintain that engagement, that connection, unless you have a very flat management organization. And what I mean by that is you have a level of engineers, you have a level of management, but you don't have then another layer of management and another layer of management and another layer of management. In other words, figure out how to cut out and make an organization as flat as possible, uh, and remove as much of the management from it as you can. That doesn't mean that it's not a good thing. It just means that a lot of those managers will have very little idea of what the work is that the engineers are doing on a day-to-day basis. So I think that's important. And that's one thing that I've always tried to maintain a connection with.
Yeah. So for my last question, I wanted to ask if you have one piece of advice for someone who's still in high school or early in college wanting to follow a similar career path as you.
Yes. I guess I'd have sort of a long answer on that. I think there's a few things that people should kind of test themselves on in and what y equals mx plus b is. Can you talk about that? I mean, I don't mean, get down, solve a bunch of problems, do a bunch of work with it, but do you understand what concept that kind of is getting across? I think having a semester of algebra is really something that everybody should have, because thinking abstractly in an algebraic kind of sense, there's really no substitute for that in terms of problem solving in the world. So I think people need a fundamental knowledge of algebra. It doesn't mean they have to go very far with it, but at a minimum, I think everybody would benefit from that. I know a lot of people think that math is hard, but it's as hard as you make it. I mean, you can get through it. I've done tutoring for school kids on math. I know that most people can make the connection eventually. So I really think that's an algebraic type of background is something people that, they should really be fairly fluent in that. I also think that some finance concepts are real important. Most people, when they get out of high school, don't have a lot of financial knowledge. And I think if you don't understand the concept rather of compounding, as it applies to finance, then, compound interest, how loans are structured, things like that, you kind of need to understand that. And most people don't learn about it early enough. So that's something I think everyone should learn. Um, I think having some humanities experience is important if you're going to go into technical stuff like STEM stuff. For example, I think this is one thing that I missed out on was I didn't have a great grasp of world history. I don't think you have to be an expert at everything. I don't think you have to remember all the names and all the dates, but I think it helps to have a pretty good grasp on history, uh, at least be conversational with it. I think that's one thing that's important in high school. And then, of course, things like, how does the Constitution work? The U.S. Constitution, it's pretty much the most rugged, battle tested governmental document man has ever created. So if you can't name like what the first and second, for example, amendments are, you probably shouldn't be out of high school. Honestly, that's something that's real important. And so I think that's something that people need to learn about. And this is more going to the idea that people, when they're well-rounded, they'll make good engineers. If they understand a lot of different disciplines, a little bit about everything, then when you go into engineering, you become very well-rounded. And then finally, I think the last thing would just be, be able to describe how something works. Like, one example might be like, I don't know, a chainsaw, or how about a car? Everybody has a car, right? Do you know how it works? Can you discuss how the engine and the drivetrain work together? Things like that. Just having an understanding of how a semi-complicated machine works and be able to describe that. That's something I think that would be something I'd want to be able to do when I got out of high school. I don't think I could when I was in high school. But that's something I think now I would sort of demand. I think you should get your money back if you don't have some ability to discuss a semi-complicated thing that appears in our everyday lives.
Yeah. All right then. Thank you for joining me on the podcast today.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate your time.